Episode 274, Facing the Critics. This is the Change Underground. I'm your host, John Moore. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. As we covered back in episode 272, methane, the arguments against the continuation of certain agricultural practices may be based in opinions rather than a critical analysis of the science. And if we get this wrong, we could be driving towards a hell on earth. And that destination is not in my sat-nav. Quaint word, sat-nav. Never actually used one, and Maps, Google or Apple does the job horrendously better. And not as expensive, so there you go. They have gone the way of the pager, the fax and the typewriter. And we just stand by and watch the cow, the sheep, and all the other ruminants follow them into the dustbin of history. The Economist podcast, to a lesser degree, published on the 5th of October, started from the position that beef is bad, okay, and the best way to overcome this evil, in inverted commas, is to grow beef in a bucket. Well, they call them biodigesters, but you get the picture. The second option offered was a plant-based meat. Now, ignoring the obvious oxymoron, meat as nature grows it is plant-based, but I'm just being pernickety now. Let's interrogate these claims. The underlying premises of the anti-beef in particular and anti-meat in general arguments come down to three principles. Methane, as covered in episode 272, is the first one. 2, meat is murder, I'll get to this. And 3, food fed to animals is wasted and should be fed directly to hungry humans. Okay, let's face the big one. Meat is murder. This is the summary. The longer version goes like this. I won't eat anything with a face or a mother. This position is the end point of a line of thinking that separates humanity from nature, that places us above and outside the workings of a system that's evolved over the last 3.7 billion years, give or take a week. The vegetarian-vegan line of thought travels in a straightish line from nasty, brutish and short lives through the growing, in inverted commas, civilization of humanity, to the alleged end of human slavery, to the emancipation of humanity from the animal kingdom for the good of the animals and the virtue of the humans too. This is not the place for an esoteric discussion on the nature of time and its seemingly one-way flow, but suffice it to say that the arrow of time has been applied to natural/biological systems with little ill effect until there is. The idea that evolution has been heading towards humanity and that as humans we are now above the process is what led to eugenics, the master race in the 1930s Germany, and forced sterilisations of the disabled across the civilised world. From this line of thinking, as I see it, as I see people see it, we are a special species, outside and more important than nature. We have responsibilities based upon the Abrahamic religions to apply the commandments to ourselves and then strangely to the animals over which we allegedly hold dominion. This leads to bizarre consequences. Look, I can see an individual's decision to not eat meat. It is when that individual then decides their dog or cat doesn't need to eat meat and can also go vegan that I begin to see animal cruelty. In listening to the vegetarian myth, I discovered the concept of removing all carnivores to produce a heaven on earth. The idea proposed in a chat group for the division of the Serengeti into two parts, with herbivores on one side of a fence and carnivores on the other, to end the killing based upon the fact that carnivores don't actually need meat, because one poster in the forum had seen their dog, in inverted commas, eating grass. I'll be generous and assume this is just a lunatic fringe, but that the idea could be considered at all by anyone rather bothers me. I am, as I assume my longer-term listeners would have concluded, of the we are actually part of nature school of thought, not better, not worse, than other parts, just capable of reflecting upon our actions. Now, things like CAFO, I think, are clearly not a part of nature. For that matter, no part of agriculture is, but the extent to which we diverge from the original evolved systems determines the level of blowback we'll end up wearing for our actions as a species. And this blowback is not a direct cause and effect system. Those of us in the developed world, whose nations are mostly responsible historically for the increased CO2 in the atmosphere, are the least likely to suffer from the initial consequences. It is places like the low-lying islands in the Pacific which are already beginning to drown in sea level rises, the once self-sufficient small farmers of the developing world who are unable to withstand prolonged droughts, and the poor in the developed world who are being killed off by heat waves and cold snaps that suffer the consequences. Now to the food fed to animals could, nay should, be fed to humans, and all the domesticated beasts allowed to die out naturally argument. Where to start? My go-to starting point is, as ever, biomimicry. If we take the premise that agriculture is an inherently flawed process from the biomimicry standpoint, so far, we need to find a balance between animal and plant systems. In the wild, animals maintain certain ecological types, niches, ecological systems even. For instance, Yellowstone Park is a good example. Wolves were reintroduced in 1995, and the deer that had previously been feeding wherever they wanted. After the wolves arrived, the deer tended to stay away from the waterways as they were ambush sites for the wolves, and these areas regrew their tree cover. This stabilised the banks and cleaned the waterways. Other areas now had higher deer pressure, and this led to healthier grasslands, as the deer were forced into higher concentrations and more movement, just like we're biomimicking in regenerative agriculture. The correct balance of animal to plant resources maintains a healthy landscape, and predators are important in this. So by replacing wolves with electric fences and deer with any stock of your choice, we can mimic these biological systems proven to work on the planet through billions of years of evolutionary testing. That plants benefit from animals is, I think, a proven point. I've been racking my brain and Googling like a madman to find a natural ecosystem that does not include animals. And by animals I mean things we humans can see. The microbiota are an accepted background noise. The growing of plants without animals is a slow process unless huge amounts of chemical additives are factored in. Think of the wheat fields of the world and the corn belts of the world. Growing organically, without animals, probably 80% of what's grown needs to be composted and returned to the soil. Compare this to grazing or using a couple of pigs to do the same job in a smaller scale operation. Compost, as John Seymour pointed out, manure, in 24 hours versus weeks or months from the actual process of composting. We can move on to large areas of Argentina, Australia and South Africa, along with the steppe grasslands of Eurasia. And these landforms will turn grasslands into proteins using animals. Putting them to the plough was done, and still is to some extent, but the soil loss taken to extreme leads to dust bowls and collapsed civilisations. Now we're going to hear some really interesting ideas at COP26 Glasgow, and we're going to hear a load of claptrap from politicised vegans and their useful fools who wouldn't know a food garden if they stood in the middle of it. There will be manure loads of virtue signalling around meat with little understanding that CAFOs are not the only, the best or even the most used system for meat production. Gently point your friends, co-workers and acquaintances to the rational, to the biomimicking and the best way to decarbonise the air and recarbonise the soil. And if you're ready to make the leap into growing your food in an integrated animal-supported way, go to the website worldorganicnews.com and click on the free ebook tab at the top of the page. Link in the show notes. And don't forget the Facebook group if you've got any questions or just want to get in touch or see what's going on. That would be Change Underground podcast group. I know, very creative. Thank you all for listening. I'll be back next week.